All right, we're back again today. I'm interviewing Glenna like I did last time. Like I said before, she is the founder of Six Sports, and she's on the board of a nonprofit called Women in Sports Tech, which basically allows women to have the opportunity to work in the sports tech industry. So, Glenna, thank you for being in this interview again, and really appreciate you giving me my time today.
Sure, happy to do it.
So basically, last time we talked a decent amount about Six Sports, but a lot of the viewers from last video, I think, want to know even more about Six Sports. So how would you say Six Sports as an app really ties pop culture and sports together?
A few different ways. First of all, from some of the content sections that we have in the app, we specifically focus on athlete fashion and sneaker
Mm.
trends. So that's actually sneaker trends are actually a specific section in the app. And then probably more importantly, through the content we produce, we take a pop culture angle. So as an example, when Prince died, we did a story on his obsession with basketball and how he expressed that in his life, and all of his basketball related activities, how he went to NBA games all the time and all that kind of thing. We also did stories on things like the backstory of the Michael Jordan crying meme, which is a huge thing in social media. So when did that begin, and what are the other major prolific memes in sports? And then also, as we covered sports that were going on in real time, we would always come up with an angle of not what happened, but what people are talking about around that. So our algorithm actually scored sports stories based on social media popularity. So we were able to quickly unearth what people were talking about in social media. And sometimes we would seize on that and make that a thing. So a great example of that is, I don't know if you remember with the NFL Deflategate with Tom Brady.
Of course,
And
who can't forget that? Yeah.
yeah, and there are actually court proceedings about it involving him, and the court artist did such a horrendous job of drawing, sketching Tom Brady. He looked like a skeleton. He looked horrendous. So that set off a whole wave of people like making fun of this horrendous court sketch artist, and then people doing their own versions of Tom Brady, yeah, as a court sketch. So all those things that are just fun that everyone enjoys talking about, and young people like funny stuff, shareable stuff, things that they can quickly grab and put on their own social media channels to be relevant and to have relevant conversations with their friends. So that was the other trigger for us. What would be fun for somebody to share and talk about with their friends through sports? So those were some of the filters that we looked at. And we always said, would ESPN do a story on this, or Bleacher Report do a story on this? And we always wanted to do stories that the answer to that question would be no. This is a
Right.
Six Sports story. So
Absolutely.
it's a lot of fun.
For sure.
100% of the ideas came from our editorial staff because their ages 17 to 29. So it was
Right.
things that they were interested in. So it
Ex-
made it a lot of fun for me.
Yeah, definitely. And we definitely see a huge impact on how social media, can really impact sports a lot and bring in a lot of fans who probably might not have even gotten into sports if it weren't for something they saw on social media. Absolutely. Um, so what do you think made you become involved in the sports world as much as you are? Did playing sports, do you think, growing up, as well as your father, my grandfather being the huge basketball and sports fan that he is, inspire you to become involved in the sports industry?
Absolutely, all of the above. So as an athlete, I was always obsessed with sports. I played tennis, basketball, softball. I intentionally didn't want to specialize in only one sport because I love playing all of them so much, and I love team sports in particular. So I think just the dynamic of being around teams and having the joys and the sorrows that you go through in team sports made me just love sports. as an athlete. And then as a family, our hobby was going to Carolina basketball games, football games as well, but basketball was an obsession. And like you said, your grandfather was a
Yep.
huge fan. And I don't know if you know this, but I asked him this about 2 years ago. Why did you make going to basketball games such a family hobby and a major part of how we spent our lives? Because we went to literally about 30 games a year. We would travel across the country just to go to a game, which was total treat. And when I asked Dad that, he said, because sports was the one topic that I could talk to my 3 girls about, where their opinion had just as much value as mine. Everyone could weigh in. It
Right.
removed that parent-kid barrier where
Right.
the parent always knows and is telling you, do this, do that, don't do this, and not talking down to them, but there's that
Right.
sort of, authoritarian tenor to how parents treat their kids on an everyday basis. Brush your teeth, clean your room, make your bed. And you just feel like, oh, is this the only conversation you have with a parent? And he said, with sports, we could debate who was the best player of the game, the turning point of the game, strategies, and everyone had a valid opinion. And he thought that was just a really great dynamic for the family. And I think it's a wonderful point. Couldn't agree more.
Absolutely. Yeah, no. And even beyond the whole family aspect, good point you brought up too. And something I'll definitely feed off of what you said for sure is how sports can really, I guess you could say, unite people more than almost anything. Obviously a lot of people disagree with politics and all that stuff, but when people are watching sports, you can just even like throw the politics away and you just, enjoy sports, because there's more to life than just obviously politics and, arguing with your family. Like you said, something, sports is something that everyone can get behind, and something that, a country can even, definitely get behind for sure. Like, for example, I remember growing up as a kid, always loving watching, USA basketball in the Olympics, especially in 2008 and 2012 when we were really good. Those were some really great, fun times when I was growing up as a child. And it's cool watching the whole country kind of get behind a team like, for example, the USA team in 2008, 2012, or even like the 92 Dream Team, like, that's what's been mentioned in, The Last Dance. So absolutely.
I couldn't agree more. And I always have said sports and music are probably the 2 best unifiers we have in culture, that no matter what part of the cultural spectrum, political spectrum that you come from or relate to, you can come together as fans. And I agree with you also. The Olympics are so special. I had the privilege of working at the 84 Olympics when Michael Jordan played. It was the last time that there were amateur status players in the Olympics. So the next Olympics was the Dream Team, or maybe it was 2 after that. But in 84, he was a student at Carolina.
Wow.
And he played, and it was in Los Angeles. And for me, being there and seeing how players from all these different colleges who are normally competing and who know they're going to be competing against each other going into the NBA, how they came together and bonded as a team. It was phenomenal to see that. So I think it's equally as uplifting and inspiring for players as it is for us fans.
Absolutely.
I really miss the Olympics this summer.
Same. Yeah, exactly. Same. And like, yeah, it really sucks. And also too, I feel like with basketball more than anything, it's not even just the players you can relate with. It's also the coaches. For example, there's Bobby Knight. He's obviously a legend. He throws the chair on the court when he got pissed off. And
he was the coach of that 84 team, so I know that.
Awesome.
Maybe something you don't know, that I became somewhat beloved by the players in 1984 because I figured out that Bobby Knight loved vanilla chocolate strawberry, that striped ice cream. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
He loved that. And he got grumpy around 3:30 every day at practice. I would go get him that ice cream and bring it down to the court. and he would be happy as a clam eating it on the side of the court, and the players were like, yeah, you saved us from getting screamed at, running wind sprints, because I knew his grumpy time. I figured that out and did that every day. So that's one of my favorite Bobby Knight stories.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, and we talked a lot about relatability and marketing in sports. So the next question I really wanted to bring up is, first of all, why do you think that the MLB, doesn't really market players individually to the level that the NBA and the NFL does? And also, how long do you think the MLB can continue to stay relevant if they don't really speed up the process of making players relatable and marketable to, us baseball fans?
Well, on the first part of your question, why doesn't MLB market players more individually? I think the root issue is it's a cultural issue with Major League Baseball. It is always frowned upon individualistic displays of emotion. It's never allowed players to sort of customize how they dress or just to be very expressive on the field. The bat flip is probably the most controversial display of emotion in baseball. It's funny because they fight. They don't mind that. They scream at the umpire and get in their faces and look like they're about to fight. That is the one, outrageous thing that happens. It's not even that outrageous compared to some other sports. But the bat flip after a home run is just, cultural taboo. It's meant to be disrespectful. Whereas you think about it, in football, the end zone celebrations are now such a big deal. Teams like rehearse them and their dances, and they're shared all over social media. And NBA, you have, the LeBron pump, you have the Curry point to the sky, the Kobe fist pump, the Jordan shrug. All these things are just cultural phenomena, and it makes you feel like you know who that player is. So that human relatability is so important to creating a marketable star. It's the first ingredient. People have to feel like they can relate to him. And baseball kind of doesn't let you into who the players are. And so I think getting to the second part of your question, what will it take? I think you will continue to see a decline in popularity of baseball and even participation in baseball from young people in the US if they don't open up the game to reveal more about the players on the field and off the field. As a marketing and branding specialist, I think will continue to be a barrier. And I think what you see is, we have more and more players coming from other countries where baseball is a cultural phenomenon. And
like Dominican Republic and all that
in
stuff.
this country, you find that kids like you who grew up with a father who was obsessed with baseball, you appreciate the history and the rules and all of that. You have an understanding as to why it is. So you give the sport a pass. But if you weren't a kid that had a father who taught you all of that, or a family that made it your family activity, then you're not going to find too much that's relatable for it. So I think they're making it very hard to grow the sport because they're limiting the accessibility of it. So I wish they would, I wish they would get bold and make some evolutions. The other issue, of course, is the game being over 3 hours long. It's so slow. That's continues to be a big problem, and baseball doesn't seem as open to evolving the rules of the sport to be more relevant. If you look at the NBA, the NFL, tennis, golf, every sport has other sport has had more evolutions of the sport themselves and rules to be more relevant to the time. So I wish baseball would do it.
The only thing I really think the MLB has done, and they've only done it within the past couple of years, and it speed ups the game a little, but doesn't even really speed up that much, is I think you've probably noticed how each pitcher has a certain amount of time before they pitch the ball. I think it's like a 35 or 30 second limit or 45 second limit. Because I remember back in the old days when I was watching baseball as a very young kid, there wasn't even really a limit. So at least they're trying a little bit more, but I feel like maybe they might have to make the even quicker for the pitchers to have to pitch the ball. Like it might
Yeah,
even,
and I think they put a 20-second limit on the batter in the batter box,
yeah,
getting ready too. But by the numbers, I
it's still
I don't
very
think
long.
it cut off more than 5-10 minutes.
Yeah,
They
it doesn't do
still
that much. Yeah,
averaged over 3 hours last season. So I agree with you. Like that was a step. Instant replay was another one that's
oh yeah,
still hotly debated. I think they're all good moves, but not enough.
exactly.
I feel like they keep trying to be tentative with their moves
Yeah,
and
and,
just chipping away at it, and it's really not making a big impact.
and I agree. Like the only really long baseball games I really love to see are the ones that go in extra innings, because the extra inning games, that's the one thing about baseball that is, I mean, obviously basketball and football, there's overtime and all that stuff. But with baseball, I feel like with the extra innings, it's like, is there going to be a walk-off? There's so much, joy to
You're
extra innings.
right. You're
Like
absolutely
I feel
right.
like I feel like what you're saying with the longer games, though, where it's like the score's 12-0 and it's still a 3-hour game. It's like, well, if it's 12-0 and the other team doesn't even score at least 6 or 7 runs to even make, they're not even really catching up. Why are we going to watch 3 hours? Like, I get that point of it exactly, because it is a very, not always, but it can definitely sometimes be a slow paced sport for sure, especially when there's not, many, much action going on, whether it's, because sometimes in baseball, both teams might have a no hitter both through the 4th inning. And for me, even though some people might think that's boring, I think that's interesting. But however, if it's one team up, like I said, 15-0 in the 5th inning, like, why does that game have to be 3 hours long if the game's basically already decided? So I think I agree with you 100% that there probably are ways to make baseball more of like a, because NBA games are average 2 hours 20 to 2 hours 30 minutes long. I feel like baseball, if they could find a way to make it around a 2.5 hour game, I feel like a lot more fans would definitely like
I
be
agree with you.
up to that for sure.
And 2 other points on that. One is I think this year they're enacting a new rule where you can't have a pitcher in for less than an inning. So in those tight games you're talking about, they'll often bring in a new pitcher to pitch one batter so that they
Which
can
blows up the game a
pitch.
lot.
Yes, and so every time a new pitcher comes in, they have to have warm-up pitches, and the manager comes to the mound, and that slows it up. So that's probably a good innovation that will help and make the whole pitching, uh, which pitchers you put in, much more strategic, and also could create more hits in those tight situations and make the game more exciting. So I think I'd forgotten about that
Mhm.
until you just said that. I think that's a
Yeah,
great innovation.
I honestly think that could, especially in close games, that could quicken up the game by at least 15 or 20 minutes in some games. Absolutely. So I
I
think
also
that's good.
personally think 162 games is way too many to care about. I know they do that for attendance because they make more of their money on
Right.
attendance, ticket sales, and so they have more games for that. I I find it very difficult to call any game must see baseball when you play the same team 4 days in a row, and
Yeah.
it's not that exciting. So that would be, to me, the radical move would be to significantly reduce the number of games.
Well, that's what and I'm gonna wrap up the interview after I bring up this point. But I think a huge point to bring up is because of this whole quarantine thing that we're all going through because of this whole coronavirus situation. There's a proposal of an 80 game baseball season this year. So, we might see a lot more interesting baseball this year because there are a lot less games probably going to be played if the season starts. I really hope it does. But if it does start, I feel like baseball might be a lot more interesting because, you know, teams aren't really going to have the option to either coast to. There's a lot of teams that go like 160. With 80 games, you kind of have to make your mark, right away. and there's also going to be a lot more tighter playoff races. So actually, I think having an 80-game season, kind of like upon like what you were saying, that might actually make it more interesting, this whole pandemic, because baseball, with having less games, I feel like more people might actually watch, because I feel like there's more on the line for these teams because they have less games to prove themselves. So
I totally agree. I also think it's an opportunity for them to do some experimentation with how they get more fan engagement from television and from streaming.
absolutely.
Because it won't interfere with the game, but they could do things like mic up players, mic up bullpen coaches more, and
Yeah.
it create virtual fan zones, cheering areas, have contests to enable fans to have a post game dugout or locker room visit virtually to talk to the players or join a post game meeting or something like that, to give
Right.
fans access inside baseball that maybe they've never even considered before because of
Right.
this pandemic. So I
And
really hope not only baseball but all sports take advantage of this opportunity, as difficult as it is going to be not to have fans in the stand, but to get creative and innovative and maybe even draw from some of the things you're seeing, like through the NFL draft, that garnered 15 million viewers in
which is
live viewership, which is huge. That's as much as an NFL network primetime playoff game viewership.
which is unbelievable to think it's a draft is the same as a playoff game, and you would never think. But I mean, I feel like people appreciate sports now more than ever just because we don't really have them as much.
And I think they
That's
will. I think they'll be so hungry for it. Baseball has an opportunity
absolutely.
to bring in new viewers that maybe they didn't have before. So I certainly hope they take advantage of it and learn from the NFL draft, learn from a look at the ratings of American Idol and The Voice and how they were made. Those are somewhat live virtual competitions. They
Right.
were able to make those interesting. So I hope to see some creativity from baseball, and maybe they'll discover some self. I saw Roger Goodell say, this was such a success. The ratings were up almost 40% year on year. They're going to continue some of the things that they did this year going forward in future drafts, even when they're in person, which is
Awesome.
great. That's exactly how you ought to look at it. Let's look at this as an opportunity to innovate and bring in new fans. And
Absolutely.
I'm pulling for baseball to do that.
Absolutely. All right. Well, listen, I think that wraps up, time we have for today, but I really appreciate, you giving your time. I really enjoyed this interview a lot. I could do this interview with you all day, but I don't want my teacher to have to.
This is pretty much what our phone conversations are like, or our FaceTime conversations are like when we're not being recorded for school. So it's
Exactly.
my total joy to talk sports with you, Jack. I love it. I could do that all day too.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Sure thing. You take care, and I will talk sports with you again soon.